Hello and welcome to the interview here on France 24. Our guest today is Adam Baszko, who is the co-author of a book with Gilles de Ronsoro and Arthur Quesnay, a book published in French. It's called Syria, Anatomie of a Civil War. It's an interesting and original work because it's based on the ground work, underground testimonies, over 250 testimonies until 2013, where most of outsiders were essentially sealed off of Syria. It's an interesting work. However, those interviews were conducted only in the areas not controlled by the regime. So in a way, it provides very interesting insights of the beginnings of this revolution back in 2011, but just from one side.
Yes, absolutely. And it was a situation in 2012-13 where one had to choose. No one could write publicly on both sides at that time, and no one did. We chose to work on the insurgency and PKK-controlled area in the north of Syria, because there we had something amazing happening, the invention of a system of institutions based upon a revolutionary movement, something we have seen in other places where we worked, in Afghanistan, in Iraq, in Libya. But in Syria, to an extent, that was quite unprecedented, with municipalities, governorates, courts. And this institutional system we deemed was underestimated, underspoken about, and worth studying.
Especially now in retrospect, the situation has changed dramatically for the worse. Probably the regime has always said, and is now saying even more easily, that this was not a democratic revolution or a kind of traditional revolution. This was always an Islamist insurgency. From your eyewitness account, if I may say, you're saying, no, this maybe did not last, did not succeed, but at the very beginning, there was clearly a willingness to change the regime and not create an Islamic caliphate.
Yes, and this is tremendously important. The end that we are seeing today, the situation that we have today, is used to reconstruct history at a pace that is very quick. But to understand how this crisis led to the situation we have now, one has to go through the various steps. And that's what we do in the book. What we try to do is to show that the demonstration started in a context in which people were, instead of looking at football match in TV, were watching Egyptian demonstration in Tunisia. And when they saw Ben Ali and Mubarak falling, they started thinking that it was possible Bashar could fall. It wasn't just possible, Bashar would fall, as the other did. And we tried to show that in 2012, 2013, the rebellion that emerged out of the repression of the regime in the area controlled by the revolutionaries had a very different trajectory from what we're seeing today. It was a large pluralist with moderate insurgents, Islamist insurgent, with a lot of discussion. We would see, when we were in Syria in 2012 and 13, debates over what is a sense of freedom, what is the use, what are the values, how you should govern. And those discussions, this emulation, was the proof of something that, though we don't see it today, showed that another trajectory was possible in Syria. And even today, that there are people willing among the Syrians to see Syria going another way than the one it is currently.
How do you explain this failure?
Part of it has to do with the difficulty the insurgency had in Syria. It had difficulty to unite. It had difficulty to unite because of how it started. It started as spontaneous demonstration. If you wanted to demonstrate in Syria, you had to demonstrate within this repressive regime as a person, as an anonymous person. And the difficulty of building out of it an organization was very important. It meant that organizations like the PKK and the Islamic State, which had a base in Iraq or in Turkey, with longer experience, the PKK has formed itself fighting the Turkish army, a very, very long and hard war. The Islamic State began in the moment of the American occupation of Iraq. those organizations were better resourced, they were better able to use their resources and better able to compete with the insurgency. On the other hand, the difference was that the insurgency was never really supported in the way the regime was. We always spoke about the foreign fighters, but the biggest numbers of foreign fighters were not on the side of the insurgency, they were on the side of the regime. The Hezbollah, the Iraqi militias, the Iranian Pasdaran, which were fighting. The Russian support was very systematic, the Western support in the insurgency was not.
Because also the opposition was divided, not very efficient militarily. That's what we have been hearing at the time.
Yes, but at the same time, it was a self-fulfilling prophecy, because the fact that you never had one strong support line of support was create a situation in which individual donors would give to the insurgency. And so any small group could position itself as the battalion of something and gain money. When we come in Syria in December, January 2012, 2013, we observed the starting of the Aleppo municipality. They had huge problems to deal with garbages, with sicknesses, hygiene problem in Aleppo. When we come back in August, this organization with almost no support, a few tens of thousands of dollars, had been able to create a garbage collection system, a system to deal with the bombings, the white helmets, a system to deal, a system of election to give some legitimacy to the people there. And they never received support. If you compare that to the very consistent support of the Russian and the Iranians, which supported the Syrian bank, the National Bank, the Syrian army gave training, and for the Russian even intervened by 2015, you had here a huge difference in the way the international actors decided to play within this conflict. You cannot just look at this conflict as something happening within Syria.
Right. Nevertheless, at some point, you probably on the ground and the people you were interviewing were certain that Bashar would fall.
Absolutely, absolutely. In 2000, and
despite the foreign support and so on.
And they were also sure that foreign support would come.
For them.
For them, yeah. They were sure. They imagined themselves as having something so close to what the West wanted: democracy, liberty, freedom, all those words that they dreamed of and spoke of very seriously. They were certain that support would come.
What was the turning point?
August 2013. In August 2013, you see Syrians starting to understand, or well, I would say to understand or to think that there is no way the West will give them support if they don't support them when there is a chemical attack. If when they said this is a red line, they won't do anything, the only support they have is Turkey, the Gulf states. And that's a moment, if you want to fight, you'd better be on the Islamist side. If you want weapons, you have to be on the Islamist side. The only people the US would train in 2013 and 14 were people that would sign a paper saying they will not fight Bashar al-Assad, only the Islamic State. The United States were training people with the promise that those people would not fight for the revolution for which they started fighting. That was impossible to hold.
Right. I want to focus a little bit quickly on the Kurdish areas. Now there's a lot of Western support saying the Kurds who control a part of Syria near the Turkish border are the best chance we have to fight the organization of the Islamic State. You're saying be careful because the consequences could be bad for the West and even for Syria.
We're saying that it's more complicated than what the West would like to see. We project a lot of our fantasies over the Middle East on the Kurds. We look at them as the only group, the PKK would be the only group which is in favor of women's rights, which is this secular group, which is open to democracy, people's rights, grassroots democracy, words that the PKK use with a very skillful way with the media. We're saying that the PKK is a movement that has been used by the regime the regime delegated the repression in April 2011 to this movement and gave to this movement the control of the key areas, the Kurdish areas in the north. The second thing is now that we look at the Kurds and as the only way against the Islamic State, we're forgetting that in January 2014, the Free Syrian Army takes Raqqa, takes Deir ez-Zor, and gets no support. What happened in Kobani never happened to the insurgency. This massive support with the Americans forcing the Turks and giving support weapons, and today sending special forces. This never happened to the insurgency. And the risk is that to consider the PKK could on its own take Raqqa and Deir ez-Zor, the Arab areas of Syria. Already now, you're starting to have resentment in those areas, looking at the PKK as an occupation force. The PKK will not be able to retake non-Kurdish areas without consequences in Syria.
So in a way, you're saying the Turkish warnings that we're hearing more and more are not just posture. There is some truth to what they're saying.
The Turkish are saying what they're saying because they have their own internal situation where they have a war with the PKK. They use the arguments they can to have the West react. One of the arguments Turkey has been supporting for a long time, a no-fly zone in the north of Syria, is, I think, a solution that would have helped a lot Europe. It was a central interest of Europe not to have such a crisis of refugees. Well, a no-fly zone would have allowed to keep refugees in the north of Syria. A no-fly zone would have allowed those institutions we saw in 2013 to strive. And in that sense, it's true that the Turkish arguments are sounder that we tend to think.
Okay, Adam Baszko, thank you very much for coming on and for enlightening us on the tragic situation in Syria, more than 5 years of civil war. Thank you very much for watching this edition of the interview here on France 24.